and different things. So you'll see the record button now on your screen. So let's start off with a couple of polls now that we've done the intros, just to get a sense about how you're feeling right now in terms of planning and executing your virtual event. So you should see a poll now on your screen. I've put in the 3 options that most people report when they haven't done virtual events before, and they're starting off, which is apprehensive, fear of the unknown, things that can go wrong, etc. Fine, like it's just another thing I have to get through. Confident, because some people, you know, so much live events experience that they kind of think this can't be that bad, or something, you might have something else entirely. But if you can just let me know, it's good to get a sense of how you're feeling at the start, and then I can be aware of that as we go through. So the majority of you, as I've seen across so many of our courses so far, are feeling a bit apprehensive about it. So we've got 10 of the 12 of you who've voted, so a couple of people left, 11 of you, 12, perfect. So the majority of you are feeling a little bit apprehensive about things right now. Most of you are feeling fine, and someone's feeling something else. If you want to unmute yourself and tell me what the something else is to throw it in the mix, by all means do. If it's just a mix of those things, don't worry. Let me know. Maybe just a mix of those things, we can talk about that. So yeah, the majority of you, absolutely the same as we're seeing across the board. Most people's apprehension with virtual events comes from basically fear of the unknown. You know, the things that can go wrong, tech issues, etc., just a new area. The fact that some of you are feeling fine is brilliant. None of you are feeling confident about it. So that's telling, and I think is probably due to lack of experience or lack of sort of understanding exactly what's expected of you, what other people are doing in the market maybe, and the sort of level that you're working to. So thank you so much for your honesty, and it's great for me to know that. So we'll just share those results. You can see those. So great to see how you're doing. And then I'm just going to do another quick poll as well. You mentioned it in your intros, but again, just to get a feel of which virtual events you're likely to mostly be doing. So webinars, full-scale virtual conferences, hybrid events. At the minute, probably none of us are doing hybrid events because we can't get together, but it might be in the medium term. You are likely to do hybrid events. Virtual trade shows, which are your large scale, usually, you know, 200 plus exhibitors, or a mix of everything. So again, just helps me couch the discussions and what I'm talking about based on what you're doing. So one of you so far just webinars, and the rest of you are across a mix. Another one, full-scale virtual conferences, perfect. So I'll just share that with you. Yeah, so one of you probably likely to be doing mostly webinars, one of you likely to mostly be doing full-scale virtual conferences, and the rest of you doing a mix. So we'll just make sure as we go along that we're aware that we're talking about webinars, full scale, and possibly a mix of all. So that's wonderful. Great to get a bit of involvement from you and where you're at. So the types of virtual events that we mentioned there that I want to just touch on. This training is basically the building blocks foundation for all virtual events. So whether you're purely doing webinars, you're doing a larger scale virtual conference over, you know, a month with content, with networking, with breakout rooms, with round tables and workshops, etc., full scale over a longer period of time. If you're doing eventually hybrid events where you have the live version supplemented by online, or even if you're doing virtual trade shows, none of you are doing that, so we won't hone in on that. But basically, when we go through this training session, and the areas we look at are the foundations for all of these events. So there are some things that change, but essentially the building blocks of how you're planning, how you're executing, and the types of platforms you might want to look at work for all of them. This, I think, is an important quote in terms of where we are right now. I'm sure you've heard this one a million times, but it's not the strongest of the species that survived or the most intelligent. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. So for the freelancers amongst you who are now pivoting your services to organizations that charge, you know, through delegate and sponsorship revenue, that are now looking to explore this, and to those of you who are fulfilling goals for your organization, with all of this, if you're adaptable to this new norm, then you're going to survive and you're going to do really well. Because what I try and underline through all of our trainings is that whilst we're all experts in live events, events are just a platform for us to help solve people's goals. All we're doing is trying to create areas where people can come together, they can hear from experts, they can network and build business, etc. So while we all do live events, and that's what we've all done for many, many years, now that we're flipping to virtual, there's a perception that perhaps it's less valuable than live events because you haven't got that face-to-face element. And in some areas it is, but in other ways virtual events can be more valuable. So again, just to caveat everything with, the whole point of live events is to help solve problems for a community, and the event is just the vehicle to do that. So being adaptable and moving into this new norm is basically the survival of our industry, basically. So important to remember that. So in terms of the session today, our agenda, there's a lot of points here, but it's basically not a whistle-stop tour. Some of them we go into quite a lot of depth, but it's basically, I want to cover off for you the planning across all the different facets. All of this is caveated by you're all experienced events professionals. So a lot of it, the sort of foundations you've already got. What we focus on is how live events would now manifest in a virtual platform. So from your strategy and content, the timing and duration, different networking ideas, dry runs, troubleshooting, etc. So the idea is that we run through sort of the planning phase and cover off every area of that. So we'll start with the strategy, content, format part. And let's start off at the very obvious point in the first instance, the limitations of virtual events. It's kind of the first thing that people talk to us about, especially if we're pivoting live to virtual. There's no face-to-face contact. There's not. We can't get away from that. Whilst I can see you all on the screen, it's not the same as having a three-dimensional person in front of me. And you haven't got that in-person networking where, you know, whilst we do good networking opportunities throughout live events, a lot of networking comes from spontaneous meetings, people bumping in and starting a conversation in the loo or at the bar or while they're getting some food, or there's so many spontaneous moments during live events that is difficult to replicate in virtual. However, there are a lot of networking solutions that we can help overcome that with. But yes, in this instance, it's not the same as live. There's no wonderful destination to explore. Talia, we can't go to Fiji, etc. You can't attract people with an amazing destination and sort of the selfish, in a very positive way, the selfish human desire to see new places or go to new areas that might historically have driven people to your events, as well as the content. And in terms of the exhibition area, where we're not talking huge trade shows, but even a Confex type of model where you have 12, 15 stands and you bring in sponsorship revenue through that angle, you haven't got the physical version of that where you can entice people to your stand with fun interactive games, stuff that's gamified, you know, bowls of sweets, people actually physically beckoning people over, etc. So let's just get it out the way. They're the limitations of virtual events. However, for all of these, there are ways in which we can get past them. And there are a lot of other ways that we can provide a lot of different value, and in some cases more value during virtual events. So you do have to work hard and work smart when it comes to moving from a live event to a virtual event. What you don't want to do is start this process and thinking about your events of, I have to replicate my live event into a virtual event. I usually do a 2-day conference. I should do a 2-day online conference. What you want to do with this is you have to work hard, but you want to work smart as well. You want to start thinking, what are the key components that work for our live events? Who are the people we're attracting? You know, be aware of people's attention spans. Hone in on what's super important to your audience and use that to start off with, and then build from there. So if you have perceptions that you have to replicate a live event in a virtual platform, throw those out the window right now. It's about going back and thinking, what value do I bring to this audience and how can I best do this through a virtual platform? So in terms of the strategy, reminding ourselves of the strategy of live events, and the same for virtual events. What we do with events and the platform that we use, as we mentioned, is we provide value and we solve problems. So organization comes together to provide value in terms of understanding what the leaders in that field are doing, what are the best practices, how did people do certain things that you as an organisation want to do, etc. So the core of it is this provision of value and problem solving. So again, that's what happens for live events, and that can equally happen in virtual events. Content is king. I'm sure you've heard